Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 3rd of June, 2019, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today, Patrick Henningsen from 21st Century Wire. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike.
Well, it is a great day, Patrick. A great day indeed, because, the Donald is here. He got off the plane this morning and got into a helicopter. It's fantastic stuff. So 3 days, he's going to have tea with the royal family. In fact, he's just met the Queen in the last little while, last 30 minutes or so. Going to have tea with the royal family. There's going to be a state banquet tonight, and he's obviously going to meet various politicians, business leaders, and then on Wednesday take part in the D-Day commemorations. I believe he's going to be in Portsmouth for that. The usual US security operation in, to deal with that. But he looked like he was having a very jolly time with the Queen just a few minutes ago.
Look at the size of that flying armada as well, Mike. The double-sized jumbo jet looks like a Dreamliner. Plus you have the, I'm not sure whose helicopters these are, Mike. If these are US military helicopters ferrying him from the airport, but it's quite a spectacle. That's the main point. It's a big spectacle.
Well, absolutely. Now, of course, not everybody is pleased to see him in the country. And one person who's particularly vociferous about this is none other than the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. So, Sky News tweeted this out earlier on, so have a listen to what he had to say.
I think it's important for us to have good relations with our closest ally. I think it's important for our allies to be here to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the D-Day landings. We've got to have good relations with the USA, but I don't think we should be rolling out the red carpet. I don't think this should be a state visit. And why do I say that? I think our closest ally is akin to a best friend. And the thing about a best friend is, of course, you stand shoulder to shoulder with them at times of adversity, but you've got to call them out when you think they're wrong. And there are so many things about President Donald Trump's policies that are the antithesis of our values in London, but also our values as a country.
But you see no distinction then between the office of the president and the occupant of that office. I mean, if there isn't a time to roll out the red carpet for the United States president, surely, the commemorations that he is attending, surely that is the occasion on which he should.
Well, look, there are other close allies coming for the commemorations. They're not getting a state visit, a state banquet costing millions of pounds. And my point is this, some of the things Donald Trump has done over the last 2-3 years, Londoners find abhorrent and offensive, rolling back the reproductive rights of women, separating children from their parents on the Mexican border, introducing a ban on Muslim-majority countries, standing up and defending white supremacists, neo-Nazis and anti-Semites in Charlottesville, amplifying messages from racists in this country, walking away from the Paris Climate Accord, and I could go on. And my frustration with our Prime Minister is she's not willing to say boo to a goose.
He also had this article in the Guardian. So this was in the Observer yesterday. It's un-British to roll out the red carpet for Donald Trump. So apparently we should all hate Donald Trump, but only with a pretty limited set of reasons there.
Yeah, what's interesting, listen to that segment on Sky News, Mike, is Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, is just absolutely outraged by the policies of this U.S. president, of Donald Trump. And what was interesting, Mike, is he's not mentioning any policies that actually implicate the UK government as well. And specifically, he's not mentioning any policies which have wrought absolute death and destruction on the Muslim populations, because Sadiq Khan is a Muslim as well. So we'd think he might be concerned about what Trump is doing to Muslim populations around the world, in Yemen, in Syria, in Iran, in Afghanistan. And also his concern was noted about the neo-Nazis and the alt-right and the far-right and so forth in America.
Well, indeed, that's the subtitle to this Guardian article. The US president gives comfort to the far-right. The Prime Minister should speak truth to power.
And what's interesting, Mike, is Sadiq Khan's not mentioning the US, EU, and British support of what are effectively neo-Nazi militant groups in the Ukraine that have gained quite a lot of power and influence over the last few years after the US EU-backed coup in the Maidan in 2014. No mention of that by the mayor of London, and also the fact that the Trump administration's cozying up to what is effectively the far right in Poland right now at the moment. We spoke about this last night on the Sunday Wire. Now, those don't seem to be areas of concern at all. Sadiq Khan is only concerned with things that are happening over in America that have absolutely hardly any effect directly on what's happening here in Europe or in Britain. I just find that kind of evasiveness. So it's a bit lightweight criticism, Mike, because it doesn't really get close to the bone about what's happening closer afield.
In retort against this Observer article, then Donald Trump tweeted out that Sadiq Khan is a loser, and this got the Khan's friends perhaps a bit motivated. So here is Paul Mason. F off Trump, you evil loser. We're proud of our mayor, Sadiq Khan. You are demeaning the office of president. What qualifies Paul Mason to make this judgment?
I find it amazing also how some of the British commentators are kind of, you're demeaning the office of the president as if Paul Mason is an American citizen and feels offended by this. But this is this kind of, I don't know what to call it, Mike, but this kind of brothers in arms type thing between, I don't know, conservatives or what it is transatlantic wise, those who feel, I don't know what the deal is with this, Mike, but
right.
It's weird.
Excuse me? Oh dear, I was about to sneeze. Ask Des here then, retorting against some of the backlash against Trump. Sadiq Khan, hope your balloon going up as well as the Donald Trump one. Well, what's he talking about? Well, it seems that somebody has made a balloon of Mr. Sadiq Khan.
There he is.
There he is.
Rather fetching as well.
Absolutely. So here they are side by side, Khan and Trump. So he's asking, well, during the protest, will they both go up? Is this what protest has become, Patrick?
Is this what it's come to?
A battle of the balloons? Is that really where we're at?
This is what politics has come to in 2019, is inflatables, basically. So the battle of the balloons. We should have bouncy castles up on the top of opposing hill forts, Mike, and they can fly their balloons. And this just reflects politics in general. So thousands of people, Mike, have come out to protest Donald Trump arriving in the UK, and there's balloons going up, and there's face painting, there's street theater. It's a jolly good day out, but does it make any difference at all? Is it affecting the president at all? No, it's not. And it's amazing what people will get out and do their street theater for, Mike, and what they actually won't do it for. And you couldn't get any of these people to come out and protest the political imprisonment and torture of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange and the attack on the free press. No, that doesn't warrant actually getting out on the street and putting on your fancy dress costumes and doing your big inflatable balloons. No, no, no. We want to get Trump because he's a bad man and he's a misogynist and he's a racist and separates families from children, etc. at the border. All these things that are happening, Mike, over in America. But the stuff that's happening here, you can't get people to protest about.
Right.
It's amazing.
Right. Well, something that perhaps people should be getting motivated about, of course, is Russiagate and, well, Britain's involvement in that. So, well, Larouche Pac has pushed out several questions on this, the questions that Trump might want to ask when he meets Theresa May. For example, I'm going to paraphrase these slightly, but who hacked the DNC Podesta emails, because of course the evidence suggests that it was not a remote hack, but in fact a leak. But anyway, that's another issue. Was GCHQ surveilling Donald Trump from 2015 right up until the time of the election, and were they passing that information to the NSA and others? Christopher Steele dossier, what was Britain's involvement in kicking off the Russiagate saga? Were there any reports delivered by Robert Hannigan, GCHQ head, to US representatives? And let's see what else. Any UK comms between US senators or congressmen? Any UK-US collaboration on, for example, the Ukraine Maidan, Skripal affair, alleged chemical attacks in Syria? These are all questions that Trump might want to ask. Any effort to interfere with the 2020 presidential election. And the point here is that the House of Lords report UK Foreign Policy in a Shifting World Order, which was released in December 2018, They say more or less explicitly calls for Trump's electoral defeat in 2020. And so the question is, bearing in mind what they appear to have interfered in the 2016 election, have they any intention of doing the same again? These are all pretty valid questions.
And I might add that you just given the summary bullet points there, Mike, but if people want to go and read the full text, it's very detailed.
Yes.
And the questions are excellent. And where would they go to see that text?
Well, at larouchepac.com.
Larouchepac.com,
Yeah.
and it's there on the front page.
Absolutely.
It's really informative how they've broken that down, and I think it's something everyone should go and try to see if they get a chance.
Well, interestingly enough, many of the subjects that are featured in these questions, I was speaking to Bill Binney about at the end of last week. That video is going out this evening on the UK Column YouTube channel at 7:30 p.m. It's a YouTube premiere, so do go watch that if you possibly can. A very interesting discussion with Bill Binney. So please do get along to watch that. Now, let's stick with Trump a little bit. Patrick, Washington Post here's headline: Trump's stunning decision to escalate trade wars with China and Mexico signals a turning point for US policy. And it's not too much to say that there really is a trade war escalating here.
Sure. The media have been absolutely up in arms. There's a little bit of a partisan split on how this has been covered. Obviously, this is from the Washington Post, which is very anti-Trump. So they're sort of really raising the alarm here. Trump saying this has got a big league announcement early in the week, and of course, he has made major threats against China and Mexico, two of America's biggest trading partners. I might add, in terms of Mexico, they're probably the third biggest trading partner with the United States, but it also affects U.S. companies that are down in Mexico and sort of sending goods north, and that includes Ford, GM, Caterpillar. These are some of the biggest American firms that have outsourced operations down there. Of course, this president would like to have them making those products in the United States, but for some of them it's just not economically feasible because of the wage structures. No matter how much subsidies you can throw at them, I don't think you can completely subsidize these businesses. Anyway, they're basically saying that this is going to destroy NAFTA, and this is going to be an absolute disaster for economics in general in the North American trade zone. And but with this president, Mike, there's never just one thing that's on the table for negotiations. The art of the deal dictates that there's two or three things that are working simultaneously. He's using the large one here, obviously, to gain leverage on another issue. And guess what? It seems to be working. The Mexican president is hinting at migration concessions to avoid Trump tariffs. This is President Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, and he's saying Mexico could be ready to step up measures to contain migration in order to reach a deal with the United States. And by the way, this comes on the heel of an announcement by Washington that they'll be sending, I believe, 100 Department of Homeland Security officers, senior agents, down to the Mexican border where it meets Guatemala. And that's where the majority of the sort of the migrants that America is receiving are coming via the Guatemalan Mexican border. So the idea by Washington is if we can help Mexico secure that part of the migration journey north, then that will sort of mitigate the problems that we're having on the U.S. southern border. So it looks like Mexico stands ready to cooperate with this, but we'll see. This is obviously a work in progress. And also on the back of this, in terms of tariffs, Mike, you're also talking about government receipts. And that would be argued by the Republicans, by the Trump administration, that some of this money could be parlayed to pay for the wall that Donald Trump, the celebrated wall on the southern border that Trump promised the American people in the 2016 elections, which hasn't actually been built yet. So you can see there's moving parts in the art of the deal.
I mean, the media absolutely focusing on the immigration, the migrant issue, and I suppose what moving Department of Homeland Security personnel down to the southern border in Mexico does, it puts Mexico then becomes a buffer on the migrant issue. But the other issue that this is part of course, is the opium issue and particularly the fentanyl issue. the U.S.-Mexican border being the main sort of point that this stuff is coming into the country, and there's no question that the United States has an epidemic issue there, which needs to be addressed. I wonder how much of that is coming from Mexico directly, and how much of that is coming from south of Mexico.
Well, up before the legalization of cannabis, Mike, Mexico sort of probably became the largest cannabis importer on the black market into the United States. So most of that's coming through Arizona and Texas. The New Mexican border is very difficult terrain, and so it's I think there's a lot more easier access points, and obviously some corrupt border access points in Arizona, maybe, and Texas, and also tunneling as well. So, but the Mexican drug cartels have moved a large part of their operations in recent years south of Mexico. So Guatemala, Honduras, and some of these countries are doing more, especially Guatemala, in terms of cocaine production. The Zeta cartel has sort of been said to have been running a lot of what's going on in terms of the cocaine trade in Guatemala. Mexico, you have this issue of fentanyl and the opioid issue, and the issue of heroin as well, coming up through the southern border with a huge demand in the United States. So this is like a cash business that's just unbeatable for those cartels. So that remains a problem, Mike, because there's an unquenchable market in America for this. Plus, there's an economic downturn. And also the street price is down on some of these drugs because there's just a massive supply. You've got heroin coming from Afghanistan. You've got it coming from Mexico. You've got it coming from a few other places now. So the overall price on global heroin, I would say, it's probably down.
Makes it accessible.
Yeah, Africa is also getting into this business as well. Some African countries. So it's a huge problem for the rich North, because they are the #1 consumers and purchasers of illicit drugs, and so it's absolutely devastating on communities and society, especially in sort of poorer Rust Belt sections of the United States. I'm talking about Ohio and some of these other countries, states that have high unemployment rate, and New Hampshire as well has a huge opioid epidemic.
But it's fascinating that media doesn't want to discuss that too much. They're absolutely focusing on the immigration problem alone. There's no other issue there for them.
Sure. So one could make the argument that President Trump, this administration, wants to secure the southern border to sort of slow down the flow of drugs. I'm not convinced that even if they secure the border with a wall, that's going to absolutely slow down. It might raise the price a little bit of drugs, but is it going to halt the drugs full stop? I'm not sure if it will, because this has been going on for decades.
Okay, well, getting back to the trade war issue, let's talk about China. And well, things seem to be ramping up in this country. Here is a report from the Henry Jackson Society defending our data, Huawei, 5G, and Five Eyes. So Richard Dearlove, former MI6 director, the man involved with Christopher Steele in the production of the Dodgy Dossier, the man who seems to be linked to Pablo Miller and Skripals, has written the foreword in this. Of course, this is all about making sure that, well, what does he say? China uses Huawei not only to control its own population to an extreme and growing degree, but it also conducts remotely aggressive intelligence gathering operations on a global scale. So this is all about blackballing China. It's a policy which seems to be building very, very strongly in the United States as well. In the US then, as reported by various Chinese media, the US has ordered Chinese CGTN, the state media, to register as foreign agents. They've already done this with RT, of course, in the United States. But what I'm not aware of, Patrick, is that they actually removed RT's congressional press passes, which is what they seem to have done with the Chinese now. So this is really starting to ramp up in the United States.
Yeah, this is a very negative move on the part of the United States, Mike, but it's not a surprise. People should have expected this was going to happen. They thought that, this is only going to be something that the U.S. was going to do to persecute Russians or Russian media outlets. But the problem is, once that precedent's set, and so foreign media is then viewed as the enemy in this new paradigm, then China is fair game. Who's next, Mike? Who's next? Will South American countries have their privileges revoked? European countries, countries that are critical of the U.S. government, maybe? Because to be critical in this age of so-called disinformation is a threat to national security, we're told, even in some of these white papers that are coming out of all these sort of quangos right now.
Well, I find it amazing that the U.S. is so barefaced as to make this criticism of China when the U.S. has just announced that not only do you have to give over your mobile phone and your laptop at the border if you try to enter the country, so that you can have that scanned to make sure that it's suitable for you to enter. But now you have to, when you're applying for your visa or your visa waiver or whatever it is, you have to give them access or tell them what your social media accounts are so that they can decide whether you are suitable for receiving a visa or not. Increasingly, the United States starting to crack down on people in similar ways to the criticism that China has been.
So what happened to globalization, Mike? What happened to this idea that we're all sort of connected in one big international community, and we'll be able to sort of visit each other and fly and exchange ideas and bring our tools in our computers with us and share as we go and travel and so forth.
I think that only works while other countries are not serious competitors. As soon as they become a serious economic competitor, or perhaps they're pursuing a paradigm which is somewhat different to the rules-based international order, then perhaps globalization ends at that point.
So globalization's good as long as you don't threaten the dominance of those at the top,
right?
In political, economic, or anything on the spectrum, basically. As soon as you do that, globalization's bad.
Right. So, well, China seems to be wanting to hit back on this. China plans list of unreliable entities in retaliation to the Huawei ban. So they're saying that this would include any organization, companies that break the spirit of contracts, violate market rules, block supplies to companies for non-commercial reasons, and otherwise harm the legitimate rights and interests of those outfits. And so some pretty big US companies, Apple, Intel, these types of companies could very well, Qualcomm as well, could suffer as a result of that, because if they have to cut off support for Huawei as a result of the new US legislation, there's a definite possibility that they could end up losing the right to operate in China, and so they lose business. They also lose partnerships and the ability to manufacture over there. That could be pretty devastating for them.
So what we're seeing is a continuation of a kind of a mercantilist kind of playing field globally, Mike. So this is post-globalism. We're getting into a neo-mercantilist sort of era right now. And normally, if you look back through history, when there's been, not all times in history, but as often you'll see this period of mercantilism is then followed by a great tumult or tumultuous period, like a world war, so the balkanization of markets and strangling countries, blackmailing countries economically, which the United States is doing right now. This has also been followed by world wars in past history. So for that point, it's very worrying. And I do not see enough people in the media or in the analytical communities raising the alarm. I see a few people, but it's really in the political theater, Mike, I hear nobody practically. So everybody seems to be completely kowtowing to what's going on right now in terms of these trends.
So it's the 20th anniversary of Tiananmen, so of course that has to become headline news.
Well, this is our opportunity in the West to remind ourselves of this terrible event 20 years ago at Tiananmen Square in China, and how bad and authoritarian the Chinese are. That's the general sort of theme that comes when you're talking about Tiananmen Square. And that's normally taken as an article of faith, Mike. It's rarely questioned what really happened at Tiananmen Square. This was the peaceful democratic reformers rising up against the brutal authoritarian Chinese state, and they just wanted a taste of democracy and to have the freedoms that we have in the West. And they were just ruthlessly stomped out by the evil Chinese communist state. So that's the general narrative that we're meant to
consume.
to
Yeah.
consume. But is that really what happened, Mike? And so there's been a few people posing little questions about what really did happen 20 years ago. And well, Tony Cartalucci from Land Destroyer blog, who's also a contributor at 21stCenturyWire.com, he's saying that many of these leaders of the opposition he's talking about were backed by the CIA before Tiananmen Square, and many of them still openly funded and backed by U.S. fronts like the National Endowment for Democracy. And maybe this helps explain the one-sided, quote, anniversary the Western media observes every year with regards to Tiananmen Square. And Tony goes on to just point out another important point. Tiananmen Square, the role of the CIA, and he's saying MI6, the extraction missions aided by MI6, the UK Secret Intelligence Services, and the CIA. According to many accounts, I believe he's got a clip from the Financial Times here, according to many accounts, had scrambler devices, infrared signalers, night vision goggles, and weapons, which were smuggled in to sort of aid in the process of the exfiltration of these political opposition leaders who apparently, according to these reports, had backing before the Tiananmen Square event. And by the way, it was a violent clash in Tiananmen Square. And China doesn't show all of this, nor does the Western media. For China, it's very embarrassing to report that their soldiers were burned alive on Tiananmen Square. And for the West, that doesn't fit the narrative of the peaceful democratic protesters. So, but if now fast forward, Mike, that was 20, 30 years ago, right? 30 years ago, actually. I think we put 20-year anniversary there. No, it's actually, that's a mistake.
Right.
It's a 30-year anniversary. So the 30-year anniversary of Tiananmen Square, now we see all these color revolutions that have happened over the years. And now we can look at the Chinese events at Tiananmen Square in a slightly different lens. Because we've actually seen these color revolutions. We've seen the media narratives that are identical to what was put out in 1989. And so now that gives us a little bit better, I think, perspective of maybe what really went on in Tiananmen Square.
Well, if we're starting to ask questions about what went on in Tiananmen Square, perhaps we should also be asking questions about what's been going on in North Korea, Patrick.
Well, Kim's big purge, I'm sure that people have noticed that in the last couple of days in the news, this talk of this massive purge. Kim was so angry about the failing of the U.S. North Korea summit that he ordered the purge of some of his top envoys because they failed. And so we're told that when people fail in the Kim regime, in the DPRK, that they strap them to missiles, fire them off, or they lower them into a pit full of dogs that haven't been fed in 2 years, or possibly a trapdoor into a pool of sharks. You've probably seen that on some of Sean Connery James Bond movies. Well, that's what they have in North Korea, and every single office has a trapdoor, and there's sharks always on call, crocodiles, all sorts of things, according to what most people think in the West. Well, the source for this was one South Korean newspaper, Chosun Ilbo, a South Korean newspaper, made this report on May 30th. That was only 4 days ago, right?
Now, this fascinates me, Patrick, because one of the criticisms that the mainstream media makes of the alternative media is that somebody like Alex Jones will push out a headline, and before you know it, it's spread right across the internet without any fact-checking. And no establishment of reality.
Sure, and this is how disinformation spreads.
Absolutely, and here's Reuters with this headline. This is supposed to be the foundation news organization on the planet.
It's the gold standard for truth.
Right.
Reuters, right? This is the Ministry of Truth. If there was one, it would be Reuters, right? So let's look at what really happened. Well, a slight problem with this. This is one of the officials that was meant to have been purged. His name is Kim Young-chol. He's a DPRK envoy. He was with Donald Trump at the summit, and he has reappeared magically, Mike. This is ABC News. Pyongyang's official Korean Central News Agency showed Kim Young-chol sitting 5 seats away from the dear leader, clapping in the same row, in fact, and they're watching a musical performance of the wives of the People's Army officers. How nice. And reports named Kim Young-chol among the attendees of the event. And just a little plug here for the Ministry of Information in Pyongyang. It was an impressively represented the ideological and mental features of the KPA officers' wives who make every moment of their life honorable with ardent yearning for the dear leader. Okay, so we just thought we'd throw that in at the end.
Yeah.
But a slight problem with the narrative, Mike. It seems like there's people that were meant to have been purged, according to the Western mainstream media, and they're appearing now alive. So this is fake news, clearly.
Yes.
And it's even more embarrassing to be shown up by the central news agency in Pyongyang, but that's what's happening. So there should be outrage. There should be some public inquiry, right? How could all of our media outlets, the big corporate media outlets, get it all wrong? Because they seem to be waging these public inquiries to somehow contain the alternative media that they say is just causing the fake news crisis and the disinformation and the Russian media, right? The Russian media spreading disinformation. Here we have the premier Western mainstream newswire agencies pushing fake news that goes out to every single mainstream media outlet in the world. That's what happened over the last 4 days. Turns out that it's probably not true.
Well, perhaps they discussed this at the 71st World News Media Congress 2019, which took place in Glasgow. It's finishing today, in fact, so it was over the weekend and today. Well, what were they doing? It's a unique gathering, they say, of chief editors, publishers, and CEOs passionate about media freedom and taking action to ensure a sustainable news industry. So they were hoping people would join them for the 71st World News Media Congress, where they were going to look at the many ways to reconnect our news brands with the people who will influence future society. So they're extremely concerned that with their relevance. They're concerned that they're not connected with the people that are going to influence the likes of you and I in the future, Patrick. So that's what they're discussing. Well, when you're holding an event like this, you've got to have some kind of British government representation, and who better to be speaking at the event than Jeremy Hunt, the Foreign Secretary and possible future leader of the Tory party. A free media is not an optional extra, he said, still less a Western value if it forms one pillar of a thriving society benefiting people in every corner of the world. So that you must feel confident now that he's said that.
Yeah, because of course he's talking about everybody, right? He's talking about all media outlets. He's talking about the alternative media. He's talking about the blogosphere. He's talking about the mainstream media, right? He's talking about WikiLeaks, right?
Well, let's see what else he had to say, because he went on. Democracy and freedom of expression mean nothing unless independent journalists are able to scrutinize the powerful, however inconvenient this might sometimes be for the politicians on the receiving end.
Truer words have never been spoken.
We must provide a free media, not solely for practical reasons, but because it's what we stand for. Democracy and freedom of expression mean nothing, and so on. So this is what he's saying. In the meantime,
and I agree with it 100%.
Right, but this is what he's saying. And in the meantime, if you look on the UK Column website at the page called Censored, and I'm just going to scroll through this. You're not going to be able to read it because it's going to scroll too quickly. But this shows a timeline of what the British government has been doing in the last 3 years to shut down freedom of the press, free expression, and to censor anybody who has a narrative contrary to their own. So that is a very long page. I recommend people go and read it, and particularly because at the end there, we're coming towards the end of this 12-week consultation period on the online harms white paper, which is the most draconian legislation that the government has in mind for shutting down free speech on the internet and shutting down any opportunity for a genuinely free media, because what they're doing is underpinning a corporate media which seems to be increasingly employed by the government to pursue the government's narrative and to actually attack as much as possible any counter-narrative. Well, the government is attacking counter-narratives. There's a link there to the 12-week consultation period. I urge people to get involved in that consultation. It's extremely important. But look at that page on the UK Column website to get a feeling for the direction of travel, because this is what's important. The direction of travel and how the British government has been pursuing a policy for the last 3 or 4 years on this issue of freedom of the press, while they're giving speeches like Jeremy Hunt's at that Congress, promoting freedom of the press, they are absolutely shutting down freedom of the press.
And mind you, we just showed you an example of where the top mainstream mainstream media outlets are purveyors of fake news on a major sort of geopolitical story. So it's and there's more where that came from, Mike.
So let's have a look at an example of freedom of the press here, because here's this is a response from the Defend Assange campaign as a result of the Niels Melzer comments about the health status of Julian Assange. Niels Melzer is the special rapporteur from the United Nations on torture. And Niels Melzer over the weekend, yesterday in fact, tweeted out, "For the record, on 31 May, I've also given similar exclusive TV interviews to both Sky News and BBC World on Julian Assange, but it seems they decided not to broadcast them." So self-censorship from the BBC and Sky.
Sure. This is the old trick of the mainstream media. This is their business model, Mike. Exclusive. We'll give you an exclusive. They sit there, they debrief you, you talk for hours, and then they just can it. It doesn't ever see the light of day. This is what they do all the time. So to combat that, I would suggest that to the special rapporteur, Niels Melzer, to take to social media, do your own video, forget the mainstream media, talk straight to the people. Donald Trump's even doing it, right? So I guess there's one thing we could learn from Trump is use social media and go directly to your audience.
Yes. Okay, last item for today. I just wanted to end on a positive note because really good news, Patrick. Greta Thunberg, the teen climate change campaigner, as Voice of Europe has described her here, is taking a year off from school so she can go to the United States and, in fact, the Americas in general, to promote her policies to deal with climate change. That is spectacular news, isn't it?
She's sacrificing her own education for the sake of the climate.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
So she's going to speak in September to a special session on climate change at the United Nations. She's also going to speak to the COP25 climate conference in Chile in December. But with respect to her schoolwork, she said that education can wait, apparently, because tackling climate change is crucial. So that's fantastic. Well, you'll be glad to know that, of course, she runs this campaign about flight shame. So here's News 18, the headline here. This is from some time ago, but the headline here is Greta Thunberg effect, flight shame is making Swedes skip air travel. So apparently she is not going to fly to the Americas, to the United States. She's going to take a boat, which is really a bit unfortunate because, in fact, this organization, Climate Care, reported to The Guardian in 2016 that if you're on a plane, that aircraft produce 0.257 kilos of CO2 per passenger mile, but unfortunately ships 0.43 kilos of CO2 per passenger mile. So,
oh dear.
So this is a little unfortunate for poor old Greta. She
dear.
clearly hasn't considered this when she's heading over to the United States for her year-long speaking tour.
Well, maybe it's better, Mike, that young Greta takes the plane instead of the ship. And if she does that, then she won't need to take a year off school because she'll be spending less time traveling by boat and taking quicker journeys by plane. Therefore, she'll have more time to spend in class doing her lessons. I think this is a great idea. So we're putting that forward to Greta and her parents and her handlers at Greenpeace. And We Don't Have Time PR agency and financial communications firm in Sweden. Please pass that on to Greta, please. Also all the investment bankers pushing the green bonds. If you can just pass her that note.
Yeah. Okay, well, we will leave it there. Thank you very much for joining me today, Patrick. Thank you for joining us. Do watch the Bill Binney video at 7:30 on the UK Columns YouTube channel tonight. And we will see you as usual at 1 p.m. on Wednesday. See you then. Bye-bye.